Hey guys, welcome back to Zane Customs. In this week's episode, we're going to be sculpting a fairy. So I had someone in my comments on one of my videos mention that I should sculpt a fairy, and I thought about it a lot and then decided to because, to be fair, this isn't something that I would normally do. I'm not into that sort of thing. If you've seen my other videos, you'll know that I'm like superheroes or video games or stuff like that, so that's what I sculpt. But I thought it was a fair point that, not everybody's going to be into Minecraft or Avatar or stuff like that, so I thought I would give it a try. And it ended up turning out pretty good. I definitely think I have better sculpts out there, but I ended up being pretty happy with this one by the end of it. And believe it or not, this is the first time I've ever sculpted a girl, and I don't know why. I guess I never thought about it before, never realized, but it was actually tougher than I thought because I've been sculpting buff, muscly dudes so long that going to a girl and making them look more delicate, and I had a hard time, especially with the face. And you'll see I go back and forth a lot, but for a while I feel like she looked too masculine, and it took a lot of work going back and forth before I got something I was actually happy with. And normally when I start a sculpt, I'll start with a full body, but in this one I started with the head because I knew that was going to be the hardest part. So I wanted to start with the head to make sure I could get that down and make it look like it was a woman before I decided to go on to the body. But once I got something I was relatively happy with, I keep going back and forth with it quite a bit, but I got something I was relatively happy with, and then I started moving on to the body and the hair and those other things. I think the hardest part of the sculpt for sure was the face, but in particular the lips. I went back and forth and worked on the lips a lot before I got something I was happy with, and just the whole shape of the face in general was hard. Just trying to toe the line between, I wanted her not to look like she was a child, so she had to have a defined jawline and things like that, but I didn't want it too defined or too big because I didn't want her to look like a man, obviously. So that was definitely a tough thing. Once I got done with the face and started moving into, you can see here, the body and the clothes and the actual fairy wings and all that, I had a lot easier time, but the face was very time consuming. I'm blocking this whole model out in Forger. I've mentioned this a million times in my past videos, but for those of you who haven't seen any of my past videos, I use an app on the iPad called Forger, and once I get it so far, I'll eventually put this model into a program on my computer called ZBrush, which is a much better program, has a lot more power and capabilities. But I really like using Forger to start off with because, for one, it's on the iPad, so I can kind of go anywhere I want with it and sit comfortably and just have it on my lap and sculpt. And whereas my computer, I have it set up on my desk and all that stuff, and it's in my workstation. But secondly, Forger is a lot easier to just sculpt with in general, being that it's just an app and it's not really meant for professional use, and it's on the iPad. But mainly the movement, you can use your fingers to zoom in, zoom out, to maneuver the scene, all those things, whereas ZBrush you can't. You have to use hotkeys on your keyboard, and that's not like it's much more difficult. Once you get used to it, it works fine. I just find that I can rough out a sketch a lot faster in Forger. That's the main reason I use it, just for the speed. But you'll see eventually I'll put it into ZBrush and finish it off. As far as the design aesthetic for this fairy, it was kind of all over the place. I didn't want her to just be like your basic Barbie fairy or something like that in a dress with big butterfly wings. I was trying to go for a more realistic take on it, even though the said person that was telling me to do the fairy was like, you need to do more stuff for girls. Not that girls aren't into Minecraft and other things like that, but and I got what they meant, but I still had to kind of do my interpretation of a fairy. So again, I didn't want to go all over the top Barbie dresses and all that stuff, so I kind of took a lot of inspiration from Lord of the Rings elves and things like that, because I was thinking fairies, trees, nature. So that's kind of where some of this came from. And then the wings, they do look like butterfly wings, but at the base of them, I kind of just freestyle a lot of what I did here, and I don't know, it might not look really girly, but I ended up being pretty happy with it. One problem I have is I sometimes take things too far in Forger. You see, I gave this fairy this little intricate belt that hangs down on the side of her thigh, and I gave her wrinkles in her pants where that belt lays, which, could be realistic. It would affect the cloth. But the problem is I'm going to put her in ZBrush, which she is here now, you can see, and repose her. So those wrinkles aren't really necessarily going to be there once I repose her and move her legs around. So it was basically, doing extra work, adding little details, adding wrinkles that are eventually going to be erased or going to be going in a different direction or something like that, So that is one issue I do run into with Forger. Not really an issue, because I enjoy doing it. I like adding all these extra details, but it is something that I could pay more attention to and realize, I don't need to do this because I'm going to be posing her later. And here you can see I just added a bunch more detail to her tunic thing, but now I'm masking off some of the kind of ornate details, basically just for the intent that I'm going to mask those off because I want them to not to be affected, and whatever's not masked off, it's going to be affected. And what I'm doing is adding a texture. I want it to look like the whole tunic is fabric or some sort of material. So I want to add a texture in, but I want to leave the piping smooth. So you'll see in a second. Right here I just added in a texture, and now I'm inversing it. So whatever wasn't masked, it now is, and the inverse. And now I can texture the piping with a separate texture. And you might be thinking that the texture looks pretty heavy here, and it is. But the problem I've run into is everything I do on this channel you can find on my Etsy. All the sculpts you can go check out on my Etsy, and I sell them there. And I 3D print them on a resin 3D printer. And I noticed that when I do texturing like that, it doesn't show up very well on the 3D printer if I do it light. I gotta do it a lot thicker, and I don't like that, because I think it looks better when the texture isn't so heavy and it looks more realistic. But that's just then I end up with problems later on when I print it, and then you can't even really tell that it was textured. So that's why I tend to go heavy with some of these textures. And here is I just posed her in I wanted her to look like she's like starting to take flight, like stepping off the ground and flying. So I reposed her, and then that gives a lot of weird geometry afterwards, so I had to go in and fix that. And one thing I thought I'd mention, because I don't know if a lot of people understand, is sculpting on the computer in 3D modeling software. Your model is actually hollow. Like if I zoom in far enough and go inside of her body, it's actually hollow. So you're basically, when you're sculpting, you're just basically like sculpting a skin. You're not, it's not like real life where if you have clay, there's clay all the way through, or tinfoil or something on the inside to fill up space, and then you're sculpting the clay. These models are hollow, and that's not that big of an issue until you start doing certain things like reposing, or even sometimes when you texture, if you have a model that's too thin, it can affect both sides, and you start to run into problems like that. But I just thought that's something I'd mention, because I don't know who all is watching these videos would really understand how these programs work, but just thought I kind of over these videos describe and explain more and more kind of how these programs work. So I said earlier on that I ended up being happy with the way this whole sculpt turned out, If there was one thing I'm not happy with, it is the coloring. And that's not a big deal at all, because I could go in and recolor it. And also, if you want to buy this off me on Etsy, I have in there in the description, I'll color it to whatever specification you want. So it's not like if you buy this, you get this fairy. If you want it bright pink and purple, you want it to look like a Barbie fairy, I can do that. But it is something that I struggled with, because like I said, I took inspiration from the elves from like Lord of the Rings and stuff like that. I wanted it to be more of a more utilitarian type suit, and like it looks good, but I don't know if I chose the right colors and things like that. So that's something I might go back in later, and I might recolor her, just because I'm not super thrilled with the way the color came out. And aside from her outfit color scheme, even her skin gave me a lot of trouble. They have certain materials you can use that are just a skin material. That's what I ended up doing, and it looks decent, but that's one thing I'd like to get better at over the years is painting and sculpting skin and faces in general. I'd like to get better at that, because I think it looks fine here, but it could be a lot better. Yeah, once I got the coloring and the posing done, then all I gotta do is add in the base, and it's pretty much done. I did add in these little vines going around her that I thought was a nice little intricate detail, but other than that, I'm pretty much done with this whole sculpt. And I'll throw up a couple pictures here so you get a better look at it. That's the whole sculpt right there. Let me know in the comments what you think, whether you like the color scheme or if you think I should try something different. And I know in my last video I did a Zuko and said I was going to be doing more Avatar stuff, which I am. You'll see that in the future. I also got some custom D&D figures you'll be seeing in the future, so stay tuned for that. But yeah, let me know what you guys think, what kind of content you want to see. Please consider liking, subscribing. I really appreciate it. Check out my Etsy, my Instagram. Those are both at Zane Customs as well. But really, I just appreciate anyone for watching or checking out any of my content. Thank you. Have a good day.